All right, I'm going to get started, and then if people come in as we're doing the welcome stuff, that's okay. So my name is Angie Abdu. I'm on the Writer in Residence Committee, and I'm the professor of creative writing here at Athabasca. And I'm coming to you from the beautiful Elk Valley, which is about as beautiful as a place can be today. It's the travel and trade passage for the Ktunaxa people for thousands and thousands of years. I feel very lucky to have Ktunaxa friends, Ktunaxa students, and Ktunaxa teachers who I live and learn with. One of the most edifying experiences of my career was working with the Ktunaxa Council, the Ktunaxa Cultural Liaison, and the Ktunaxa Elders for my own creative project. Particularly, I really admired and learned a lot from the respect that they gave to the elderly and for the kind of wisdom that comes with age, something I don't think we do as much in my culture. People who know me might be aware that I'm not the most patient person and I just really like to do things fast. And so waiting for people who might think about a question before they answer, and then when they begin to answer, they might answer in one story, which might lead to another story, which might lead to a remembrance, which might lead to a different story, and they come around about to this accumulative answer with really deep wisdom. That was a new way of approaching things for me, and I found it really inspiring. I don't think in my culture, at least, we have the same respect and admiration for the elderly or for that kind of wisdom. And the reason I'm telling you this is because last week at Fernie Pride, I interviewed Joshua Whitehead. We had him here for our Rainbow Reads event. He's a previous writer in residence with us, and he's also a Cree writer. And we were talking about reconciliation, or conciliation, as some people call it. And he was saying that he prefers to think of, a lot of people are saying these acknowledgements have become very rote and not very meaningful. And he prefers to think about indigenization instead of reconciliation. And by which the example he used was when COVID hit, one example, and people so immediately were drawn to the outdoors, and suddenly the provincial parks were full and grass was covered with people and the woods were filled with people. And he said how people were drawn to the healing power of nature and how people really went to nature for peace and happiness and family and reform, all these wonderful things. And he said to him, he thought that was an element of his culture, his Cree culture, and he saw white culture embracing it and this interweaving of cultures. And he said to him, that's going to be the answer, is people learning from each other and taking the best parts of Indigenous cultures and weaving it into our culture going forward. And we were having this conversation with another friend of mine who was a teacher, and she had been at a professional development thing, and all morning at Teams, she said she got talked to about reconciliation, and she said it was nothing new, it wasn't educational, it wasn't inspiring, she was just getting talked at. But in the afternoon, she sat with an Indigenous woman and learned how to do beadwork and made this little pouch, a purse. And she was so excited about that, like learning something of the culture and actually doing it and turning it into something. And so for that, that was her example of indigenization. And this example of meeting with elders and really changing my attitude towards how things need to be paced and how we answer a question and how we value older people is one of my examples of indigenization. And so those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about here as I talk to you from the beautiful land of the Ktunaxa people, with snow on the mountains today and the forest bright gold and the sky as blue as the sky can get. It's really a beautiful place, and I feel very lucky to live here, and I feel lucky to work with all you as we continue to go forward and grapple with these ideas of how to move forward in a kinder, happier, more inclusive, more respectful way than we have always done in the past. And I'm very happy to welcome Naomi K. Lewis. I don't know if you noticed, but I lost my notes for everything about one page into that talk. So I will tell you, luckily I know a lot about Naomi. She is a wonderful writer who has written in all genres. She does short form fiction, long form fiction, short form nonfiction, long form nonfiction. She's branched into speculative fiction. She's very frequently nominated for Alberta Book Awards and has won some. Her book, Tiny Lights for Travelers, is won an Alberta Book Award, won a Western Canadian Jewish Book Award, and was nominated for Governor General's Award. So her career is really taking off, and she's acclaimed editor as well with Freehand Books, a publisher I admire a great deal. and she's very well respected as a teacher of literature, so of creative writing. So I feel like we're really lucky to have her with us, and we're already getting rave reviews from the students, and she's here till the end of December. So if you haven't had a chance to meet with her, I hope you do. If you're interested to taking your writing to her, she's happy to discuss your writing with you. And yeah, I feel really lucky to have you with us this term, Naomi, and welcome. And I'll just pass it over to Manager to say a few words before Naomi dives into her talk.
Thank you very much, Angie, for your insightful and very personal and thoughtful land acknowledgement. And I'm joining, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Manija Manani, the Dean in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. And I'm very glad to see that so many of you could make it here today for Naomi's inaugural talk. It is such, and I forgot to mention that I am attending this meeting from Treaty 6 territory, colonially known as Edmonton, where the leaves have started to turn color. It's probably not as beautiful as where you are, Angie, but it's a beautiful season, and that's where I am joining the meeting from. So yes, it's genuinely a real treat to welcome our new writer in residence, Naomi Lewis. Many of you already, I'm sure, know her work. I've been immersing myself over the last few days in her work, reading her original work as well as the reviews. And my decree is that Naomi's, and I say that as a scholar of literary studies, and as an avid reader myself, her work is thoughtful, honest, deeply engaging, and funny. So I really enjoyed just reading and reading. So we're so excited to have Naomi here with us. She'll be sharing with us today her insights based on the stories that she's written, crafted, and her experience. It's really a privilege for all of us students, faculty, staff at AU in FHSS to get to know Naomi better and to have the opportunity to work with her. So please join me in giving Naomi a warm welcome for her inaugural talk. I want also to take a minute to thank another minute to thank our writer in residence committee. So Angie Abdu, the chair of the committee, and I'm just mentioning the names in no particular order, maybe by alphabetically by first name. Yes, I did that. David Buchanan, Jolene Armstrong, Mark McCutcheon, Paul Hubener, and Vina Turvan-Gaddam for doing such a marvelous job year after year, selecting our writers in residence and working with them and supporting them. So again, a warm welcome and thank you to our committee. With that, I'll turn it back over to you, and yours to Naomi.
We can go right to Naomi now. Thank you very much, Manager.
You're welcome.
Hello. I hope you're all. I am seeing a big Angie on my screen. So does that mean you're seeing a big me? Okay, so thank you both so much, Angie and Manager, for those really lovely introductions. And I just also want to say thank you to the members of the committee. I know you're here. I'm so honored and happy to be in this position this semester. And to the students who've already come to speak to me, we've had wonderful conversations. It's been a real pleasure. And it's just such a gift to have this time to write, which is, sometimes rare to have a big chunk of time to focus on one's own writing, which is part of what I'm going to talk about today in this talk. So I proposed this lecture topic about how publishing works and how to keep writing anyway, which is kind of a spoiler for some of the dreary news about how publishing works. I proposed this without fully knowing what I was going to say, especially the second part of that. I think I proposed this partly because I didn't feel like I fully knew the answer, and I wanted to force myself to sit and think about it. And, you know, I know a lot of writers, a lot of emerging writers, and I know a lot of people at different points in their careers who are discouraged, to say the least. I work in writing and publishing, so I kind of, and I have for a long time been on kind of both sides of this divide. Both, I mean, I think sometimes I called the talk How the Sausage is Made, and sometimes I feel like working in the publishing industry, and I have to say, as an editor, not on the business side, but I'm privy to quite a bit of the business side, and I know knowing too much about how the sausage is made can sometimes put me in a position where I do feel very discouraged. And at the same time, I keep writing, and I have no intention. And sometimes I do have an intention actually to stop, and yet I never do. So I wanted to talk about all of that. And part of this is because part of the reason I really wanted to talk about this, and actually when I first had the idea for this topic, I thought, you know, there's no way that I should actually do this, because sometimes I have a feeling that we're not supposed to kind of say certain things out loud about how hard this is. But at the same time, I think for emerging writers, it's easy to have emerging writers and writers at all stages of the career. But I'll start by saying for emerging writers, it's easy to have extremely unhelpful goals and expectations, unhelpful and unrealistic. And I wanted to start also with a couple of anecdotes. So first of all, because again, I meet a lot of people who are setting out on trying to write, wanting to write a book. And by the way, I am talking mostly, I realized as I was writing my notes for this, I am talking mostly about prose writers of fiction and creative nonfiction, which is what I do. I do think that this whole picture can be quite different for both poets and for journalists, for kind of opposite reasons. Which is that, you know, poets have fewer expectations that they're going to become famous and rich from writing poetry, whereas journalists actually sometimes can realistically make a good living writing books. It's really fiction writers and kind of memoir writers, like all the stuff that I love doing, where you're stuck in this weird zone where you feel like, and it is true, that there's a possibility that you could become rich and famous doing this, and that it could be your full-time career. It's possible, but incredibly unlikely. And so you're stuck hoping for something that probably doesn't happen. And I mean, like, Angie introduced me as though, you know, my career is going really well. And like by all measures it is. And yet at the same time, the last couple of years, I found myself feeling incredibly sorry for myself and feeling like a failure. So that's part of the reason I wanted to talk about this too. And I'm certainly not the only one. So few anecdotes. One about emerging writers, people who want to write books for different reasons or get into publishing. So a big part of my work that actually earns me a living is that I work as a ghostwriter. And I was thinking about when at one point someone hired me to help him. And ghostwriting, I mean, it's a huge spectrum of like completely writing the whole book with someone's kind of input, or, you know, verbal input, to like basically like doing a very intense edit. So it's a collaboration. Anyway, this one guy hired me to help him write a memoir, and he did have a really interesting story to tell, which I told him. I thought it was really interesting. It was a good story. And he told me that, you know, his goal was to be a New York Times bestseller. And basically, I should have just said, no, I'm not working with you at that point, because what he was actually saying is like, this is my goal, and if I don't achieve it, it'll be your fault, and like, I'll be very angry with you. What I should have said is that's everyone's goal who writes a book, right? And I mean, ultimately, it's not exactly a goal. It's everyone's, you know, wildest dream. And it can't really be a goal because it's really very unlikely to happen. I mean, not least of all because this is not a meritocracy. The way that the New York Times bestseller list is compiled is extremely unfair and has a lot to do with who publishes you, who you know, and all sorts of other things. Anyway, we started working together anyway. We wrote a little bit, a few chapters, and like against my advice, he started sending it out to agents when we barely started and didn't get one, and then promptly fired me. Like, this was all within a month or two, and then didn't want to pay me for what I'd done. And what he told me was that he was not seeing a return on his investment. I'm not seeing a return on my investment, he said. So I'm thinking to myself, what? Like, this is not a phrase that we have in this business. We don't get a return on our investment. Okay, and then I'm thinking, I've never, like, it would just seem so absurd and alarming, and like, you are so missing the point. You're a business person, and this, like, in a way, it's not a business. A business where you do not expect a return on your investment, where the phrase return on investment makes you laugh, and you have to think for a second before you remember what that actually means, because you have never used that phrase before in your life. I mean, this is in some way or another not exactly a business, the way that an actual business person considers business to work, right? So in that sense, I'm thinking, okay, you're completely missing the point. And then, I mean, I've had many, but even recently had editing clients who have written one book and are starting out, like, learning how to write a novel, have done a good job, and then who ask, or even who haven't finished a book yet, and then you say, like, okay, so they're happy with our conversations, with the edit, and they ask me, okay, so when am I going to get to quit my day job and be a full-time writer? Like, in a month, in 6 months? Like, when is this going to happen? And then I have to say, like, oh, no, like, you're missing the point. I mean, I've been doing this professionally. My first novel was published in 2008. And I guess, it was like 2002 when I really decided to try to write professionally. I'm now 49 years old. I am, and like, allegedly, it says in my bio that I'm an acclaimed writer. Okay, like, I cannot quit my day job, and I never will be able to quit my day job, and neither will almost any other writer in the world. Like, some yes, but I mean, why do you have creative writing professors? Why are there editors? Why are there, that's not fair, because there are people whose passion is editing and they're not writers. But like, why are there ghostwriters? Why are there creative writing teachers? Because writers need to make a living doing something, right? And they're not making a living from their books. And it's not because, I've also heard it said, you shouldn't take creative writing classes because anyone who teaches creative writing, like, is obviously failing as a writer, because if they were a good enough writer, they wouldn't need to teach creative writing because they'd be making so much money from their books, right? No, not right. Like, this is not the way it works. So I wanted to, when I thought about what to say here, I asked myself what I wish I had known when I set out to be a writer, and what I didn't know. And I also have to say two things before I get into the nitty-gritty of this. One is that whatever experiences I'm having and have had in the publishing industry, like, I've seen the publishing industry change so much just in the last 20 years, for sure, last 10 years, last year. And then AI is changing everything. So everything that I'm saying is true according to me today. Somebody else might be like, well, actually, blah, blah, blah. But and a lot of what I'm going to say too is anecdotal. Like, I'm not kind of quoting a lot of stats and stuff here. But again, like, it's going to change again, and it's going to keep changing, and no one can predict really how AI is going to affect the publishing industry. I think, a lot of people are saying it's going to change it for the better, and that, like, we're just going to be using it as a tool, and that it's mostly helpful for marketing and stuff like that. Other people are saying it's absolutely destroying everything, and then the market is going to be flooded, especially the self-published market, with AI, with AI books, and that, it'll be impossible to find the, may I say, real books, the books written by human beings in the, like, huge, in like millions and millions of AI produced books that are overwhelming the market. So there's so many things that could happen, and I don't know what they are. So that's one. And then the other is that, over the years, and especially in the last couple of years, I found myself wondering sometimes, asking myself why did I do this with my life? What happened? And I often have said to myself that I'm going to stop. I often say to myself, if my next book isn't a success, then I'm going to quit. Like, that's it. This isn't working out. And it never is a success according to the definition of success that I have in mind when I say that to myself. And then I become depressed and I become angry and I become a terrible person to be around. And then I decide to write one more book anyway and decide if that one's not a success, then I'll quit. So obviously I need a better attitude, and I know that a different attitude and essentially what it comes down to is a different definition of success, right? And this is I'm in the midst of publishing. I know what the odds are. I know how hard it is. I know that I work at a publisher. Excuse me. I work at a publisher where I'm very involved in acquiring manuscripts. In fact, my title is acquiring editor. And I know that we accept 1% to 2% of the books that are submitted to us. And I also know that that's the number that's always quoted by industry, is that 1% to 2% of the books that are submitted to traditional publishers end up being published. Traditional publishers meaning not self-publishing, not hybrid publishing, right? So, and that completely bears out in my experience. I also know that a lot of those books that we don't accept are very good and very publishable, but we don't accept them for reasons other than quality. For instance, that we have another book that's too much like that one. That's often the reason, is that we can't publish more than one book that are, very, very similar in the same year or even in the same couple of years. Sometimes even short stories, for instance. I love short stories. We all love short stories, but we can't publish too many of them because they don't sell very well. And then there's lots of, and sometimes it just comes down to, there's 6 books here that we love, but we can only publish 4. How are we going to figure this out? And we have to figure it out somehow. And it comes down to a very, very difficult discussion. All 6 of them should be published. And it's not like it comes down to freehand to publish those books. I mean, if we don't pick them up, probably someone else will, but sometimes not. Sometimes I see those books that we've said no to out in the world, and sometimes I don't. And I think it's really a shame. Excuse me, I'm just going to drink some water. So I mentioned that 1% to 2% of books that are submitted to traditional publishers that end up published. There's also a number that's often cited, and I mean, I have to think this is kind of made up because this is quite impossible to measure, and yet I believe it, which is that of all the people who start writing a book, 1% to 2% finish writing a book. Sometimes I hear 5%. So if you finish writing a book, you have already really beaten the odds, if we're talking about definitions of success. And you don't have to finish a book, right? You don't have to either to consider yourself a writer and to get benefits of writing in your life and to love writing and have a lot of fun doing it. But if you do finish writing a book, that is a huge, huge achievement. And sometimes we can really forget and really not give ourselves credit for the achievements that we do achieve. So 1% to 2% of that 1% to 2% that get published, only a few of those are picked up by the big presses. There's 5 big presses: Penguin Random House, Hachette, Macmillan, HarperCollins, and Simon & Schuster. And those are the ones that can afford to pay the big advances that we all dream of. And sometimes a big advance, I mean, the biggest advances among people that my voice is echoing for some reason. Are other people hearing that? No? Okay. So big advances, the ones that I know of, the biggest ones I've ever heard of amongst people I know are, $200,000 about $200,000. That is very, very high. Most often I hear more like $10,000. And I'm still talking about just the big 5 presses, okay? If you get a big advance, the press is gambling on you because it's an advance on your royalties, right? So if you don't sell enough books to earn back that advance, then the press has lost money on you. And if you only barely pay it back even, then again, they're not going to be so eager to pick up your next book. And in fact, neither is anybody else, because they know, like they can see your track record. And that's the first thing that these presses look at, apparently. I mean, I've had the experience recently of having written a book that I thought had commercials. Like, I really set out to write a novel that I thought might be able to get a big book deal, let's say, from these 5 presses. And the reason that I've been such a negative Nelly in the last while is because it didn't sell. I mean, I do have an agent and she has been trying, but I've gotten a lot of rejections. And some of those rejections are actually based on the fact that I've published before and my books have not sold more than a specific number of copies. Well, the books that I published before are published by independent Canadian presses who never sell that many copies. So that the number that they cited was 5,000. The fact that I haven't sold 5,000 of my other books means that they don't want to publish me. But like I know from working in Canadian publishing that it is, I mean, almost never. It does happen, but rarely, very, very rarely. When it happens, it's because a book is shortlisted for or wins the Giller or is on Canada Reads. Maybe there's some other reasons, I can't think what they are. So, okay, so the big 5 presses, you need an agent to be considered by them at all. Sometimes an agent shops a book around for a really long time, and then often the book ends up with an independent press anyway, or doesn't sell at all. And why does a book get picked up or not? It's not a meritocracy. Like, of course, you need talent. Your book has to be like really, really good, or it's not going to get published. It has to be better than, thousands of others. But like I said, there's a lot more really, really great books than books that are picked up. So why is that? It's because of timing a lot of the time. It's because, did they just publish a book that's too much like yours? Things that you can't control, trends. It's also, I mean, it does sometimes come down to knowing the right people. That really helps. And then also, I mean, having a platform, right? So if you're a TikTok star, an influencer of some kind, whatever that means, then you're going to have a lot better chance. And in fact, that's exactly what publishers are looking for. The big ones is people who already have a built-in audience. So, and then there's also capriciousness. Like, there's not a formula that dictates why or why not a book is really picked up. It's the people who are sitting around discussing it, the editorial board of whatever publisher. And often it comes down to a kind of gut feeling, right? Like I guess I like this one better than this one. Why? I can't really say, That's the truth. So because of that, I think it's a really bad idea to try to write to the market, to try to figure out what's going to sell and then write that. Because you don't know, and you're not actually writing what you want to write anymore. You might not even be writing what you're good at writing. So writing what is in your heart and what you really want to write is what's most important. And again, I know this all sounds really discouraging. I'm not trying to be terrible here. I'm just trying to be realistic, because I think it's really important to know all this and then to decide, do I want to actually do this anyway? And I'm talking about the practical part of this question first. There's also a philosophical, psychological, spiritual part of this that I'm going to get to. Time's going by really fast. So some books, I've already touched on this, some very few books get huge advances. And I think we like to think of this as a breakthrough, but it's not a breakthrough, because it doesn't mean that after your one big book is published, you're going to get book after book after book. It doesn't mean, okay, now you're Colleen Hoover, now you're Stephen King, now you're Jonathan Franzen or whatever. It means like you have, every book is just as hard. It's like starting over again. And in fact, your track record from selling your previous books, as I said, can actually work against you. You know, like I found it extremely upsetting, frustrating to say the least, to realize that if I had never published before, trying to get into the American market now might be easier, and the big five, than having published with smaller presses and sold fewer books in the past. Okay, so of that 1% to 2% of books that go out into the world and end up published traditionally, many of them end up, and I am talking mostly about Canada. The same is true elsewhere. My knowledge is about Canada. A great number of excellent books end up with small independent presses, like the one I work at, Freehand, and the ones that have published me, Goose Lane and University of Alberta Press, Great Plains, and New West Press. So we at these independent presses are publicly funded, which means that we don't depend as much on the market, on market forces, right? So we can afford to publish books that we really believe in, their quality, rather than chasing the market so much. Like, of course, we want our books to sell. Of course, you know, we'd rather have more resources for ourselves, as well as having our books out in the world and having our authors make more money and have more readers. But in that sense, is a bit more like, you could see it as more of a kind of pure artistic model that we want, that we can publish like what we see as excellent books, rather than, you know, is this what's on trend right now? Is this person already famous? That kind of thing. But we also publish much fewer books, which means it's hard to get a book deal with us, but at the same time, we can put equal attention into each one and trying to sell each book when it comes time for distribution and marketing. So I mean, I know, and I've heard from writers who have published with smaller presses and the big presses, that actually publishing with a smaller press can be a better experience in a lot of ways, because they have time for you. They don't forget about you in the mix. They don't toss you aside because they're putting all their time into, you know, Colleen Hoover's book that came out at the same time as yours. They actually do try to sell your book. Like, a lot of the books that are published by the bigger ones get lost in the mix, and all the resources are going into like that big sure thing that they're trying to push that season. But we don't, I mean, I said like the bigger presses may be giving, you know, smallish advances of like $10,000, but that's actually a pretty big advance compared to what the independent presses can offer. We often offer such small advances that, like, sometimes I think, not as a publisher, but from the writer's perspective, I'm thinking like, I almost wish you hadn't offered me anything rather than that. You know, like, it almost feels insulting. At the same time, like, if you sell, then you think, okay, if I sell books, then I'll make money from the royalties. And then you realize like the chances of selling books are really low. We hardly we rarely sell. I mean, among all the writers that are published, very few ever sell more than 500 copies. And that's like, I mean, that's an American statistic that I found online, but it's certainly true in Canada too. Most books sell, and I'm talking fiction again, fiction and poetry and memoir sell fewer than 500 copies, the vast majority. And then a few sell, you know, 6,000 copies might be a really good track record for like a book that was up for an award or something like that. I was really shocked myself when Tiny Lights for Travelers was shortlisted for the Governor General's Award. I shouldn't have been shocked by this, but I thought, okay, now it'll sell. No, it didn't. It didn't at all. Like, it didn't increase sales at all. And when you think about it, it's like, do you run out and buy the books on the Governor General's shortlist? I mean, maybe a few people do, but I have to admit, I don't. Like, I try, but there's a lot of other books that I'm reading, right? And that shortlist isn't promoted the way that the Giller is, for instance. And then there's the fact that most people who are readers, and like think of the people that you know, like the people that I know that are not writers, a lot of them don't read fiction at all. They don't. It was really shocking to me when my first novel came out how few of my actual friends read it, because my friends, so many of my friends who are not writers, don't even read fiction. And if they do, they read like the big hit fiction, like maybe the Giller winner, more likely the Booker winner, more likely like the American National Book Award winner, or like an Oprah or Reese's Book Club, book or whatever. And this is something my agent said to me, which I was like, oh yeah, that's so obvious, but I hadn't thought of it, is that, there's these books that everyone reads, and it's more and more so everyone reads the same, 3 books that come out one year. And it means for a lot of people, 3 books is all they read in a year. So if everyone's reading the same 3 books, what does that mean for every other book, right, that's published? It means that fewer than 500 people read it, is what it means. Like sometimes it often means that fewer than 100 people read it. Another kind of scary trend is that the big presses are like, they used to have this thing called the mid list, right? Where there was the big sellers, and then there was a whole bunch of kind of tried and true writers who would get all their books published by Penguin or Random House or whatever, and they would sell very well, but not millions, kind of thing, right? And that was like the dependable mid list. Sharon Butala is a writer that I've worked with on a few of her books. Like I've worked as her editor. She's now published quite frequently by Freehand and also by Thistledown, which are independent presses. She used to be a big star, and she's talked about this a lot. So I'm not like telling tales out of school. But she writes about this in her nonfiction about how, her career seemed to be really on an upward trajectory, and it was. Like when I mentioned her to people who worked in publishing, at that time in the 80s, 90s, they're like, oh my God, Sharon Butala, like she was the big thing, right? And it really seemed like she was a solid mid-list writer. It really seemed to her, and she writes about this, that her career was just going to keep ascending. And then at some point, it just became impossible to get published by those big presses anymore. Now she's published by small presses who give her tiny advances. She does keep writing, right? But she's like, there's that feeling of what, like, I thought I was great, and that people like that I was going to be only get more and more famous and respected, and what happened, And it's not just her. Like, this is the mid-list falling out of the big publishers. They're not interested anymore. They want the big bestsellers. They want the TikTok stars. I mean, Sharon is in her mid-80s, and she talks about ageism a lot. And it is true. Like, people, like the big presses want like the next big young thing, right? People who are TikTok stars tend to be 25, like not 50, not 60, not 85 for sure. And that's not only because people who are older don't know what TikTok is, which I don't. And I don't want to. I kind of know what it is, but I don't have an account, and I don't want one. So the mid-list, then it falls down into the smaller presses. So like at Freehand, we get tons and tons of submissions where I'm thinking, like, why the hell isn't Penguin publishing this? Like, this is an amazing book, right? I don't understand how this ended up with us. Not that there's anything wrong with us, because we publish amazing books, but this author deserves a huge advance. They deserve to be a star. And like the big presses have obviously already said no, and it's being published by, and then we end up picking up books that, in the past would have been picked up by the bigger presses. And then that means that there's less room in the independent presses for emerging writers. So, there's less that's a big problem. We do publish lots of like debut authors for sure, but it is a problem. And I've seen articles about it, and it is true. Okay, so we often hear about people don't read anymore. Oh my gosh, the time is going by so fast. I'm going to have to skip ahead to the part where I was going to talk about how to keep writing anyway. And I think like part of this is, sorry, my throat is so dry. Okay, why to keep writing and whether to keep writing, as well as how to keep writing. I think that for me, I think the problem for me and why, and like writing this, and unfortunately, I don't have enough time to say all of it, but I think that I realized writing this is that a big problem for me is that I can forget why I started writing in the first place, right? When we start writing, hopefully, we start writing because we love books. I know that's why I started writing it, because, when I was it's like from the age that I learned how to read, there's nothing I loved more than reading fiction and feeling like connected to this kind of empathetic web of other minds, getting to feel what it's like to be somebody else, getting to get this like what felt to me like this incredible dose of empathy. Like I'm not the only person who feels like this and this and this. I'm not the only person who feels vulnerable. I'm not the only person who feels different on the inside that I, try to project on the outside, and all of those things. That's not the only reason that people start writing, that people love literature. Like it was the main first reason for me. And I love stories. I love making up stories. I was always inventing characters and scenes and scenarios, and it's like I there's nothing I loved doing more, right? But then at some point in my life, and a long time ago, 20, 30 years ago, it became like a real possibility in my mind that I could make this a career. And by career, I meant like not just make a reasonable amount of money doing it, but maybe make a lot of money doing it, and maybe even like be famous and be loved and have people think I was amazing, right? I mean, I would not have put it that way, but when I think back, you're thinking, okay, this is going to wait until people see how great I am. Like everyone's gonna love me, and that girl who bullied me in elementary school, like she's gonna be so sorry, and she's gonna realize how amazing I am, and everyone's gonna read my book and they're gonna see how amazing I am, and I'm gonna live in a mansion, and I'm gonna hang out with glamorous other writers, and it's gonna be amazing. And not only have I hope I've made clear that that's really not going to happen, it's also a really toxic goal. Okay, because like even if those things do happen, they do not feel the way that you think they're going to feel. Although having more money would still be nice, I think. So I wanted to talk about like the kind of goals of fame and fortune. Two different things, but tied together. And I think like on some level, some of us either have this in our mind setting out as writers, or like come to think of those as goals. And I think the goal of fame is really, really toxic. It's more and more pervasive. I mean, like it's almost like the malady of our times at this point. I feel like I had that goal long before like it became the goal of every single person on social media to be like admired. You think that it's going to give you self-esteem and self-worth, and that you're going to like break through to this feeling of like, now I'm a writer, now I'm invulnerable, now everyone has to see how great I am. Like that's not a thing. And even people who are famous, and I don't know because I'm not, but I don't think it makes them particularly mentally healthy or emotionally well, like it's not actually, it's a terrible goal. Not least because it's out of your hands, and real goals are things that you have control over. So like writing a book that you're proud of is a good goal and a real goal. Getting a great publishing contract is not a real goal. It's a wish, it's a hope, but it can't be your goal because you have no control over that. That's in other people's hands. And then the question of fortune, by which I mean money, like, yeah, writing is not really a career. It can be a career adjacent. Like, I'm very, very lucky and grateful that I get to do things that are writing adjacent as my career. And I mean, writing is part of my career. I sometimes get the grants I apply for. I get residencies like this one sometimes. And I make a lot of my living doing other things like ghostwriting, which is writing, but again, it's not writing fiction or my own creative writing, and editing and writing for magazines. Like, all of these things to me are writing adjacent, and I'm very, very, very happy to do them. I love doing them, but like, writing my books is not, there's no return on my investment. Okay. Like, it's bad. It's a bad return on investment. But the return, so like, our definition of success really needs to change. And the only reason to write, I mean, I wanted to talk about like whether to write as well as how to write. And I think it's actually more important. Like, the fact is, you don't have to. Like, if you like really consider stopping and never doing it again, and then ask yourself, do I still want to do this? Like, how does that make me feel? Am I serious that I'm never going to do this again? And I think for someone who's a real writer, you can't not do it. Like, it comes down to the fact that there's all these stories in your head. You want to write them down. You're happy when you're writing. You want the daily or, semi-daily wonderful experience of writing. You want the experience of seeing your work on the page, the satisfaction of having done it, the like being in that zone of focus where you're writing and you're inventing and you're making something beautiful, you're making something you're happy with. Not that every moment of it is bliss, but I think, for me and other writers I know, not writing is so much worse than writing. When I don't write, it's kind of like I kind of go a bit crazy and I'm unhappy. I feel terrible. And so yeah, it kind of comes down to that. Like, decide if you would decide, like, if you could never be published, if you knew you were never going to be published, would you keep writing anyway? And if the answer is no, then I don't think you should do it. I think you should seriously consider stopping. If you're doing this because you want admiration, because you want fame, or because you want fortune, or you want both, like, either find a different goal or find some other way of getting those things, because this is not it. Writing provides so much joy. It's such a wonderful vocation to be. I mean, it's so wonderful. And I mean, part of writing necessarily is reading, knowing what's out there, knowing what other people, what your contemporaries and peers are writing. And you're part of this community. You're part of this, like I said, like this web of other minds, both through reading and writing and being in community with other writers. I would not ever want to do anything else, but that definition of success that depends on sales numbers, on income, on like whether anyone's ever asked me for my autograph. These things are a terrible, terrible measure of success. And it's when I measure success in those terms that I feel like a failure. And it's because of those that definition of success that so many people that I know, so many people out there publish one book and are so disappointed by the experience that they never write again, and they feel like shocked and traumatized by the experience of publication. So I know now I've talked longer than I was supposed to, and I have said about a tenth of what I wanted to say. So I'll just stop there.
Thank you so much, Naomi. I agree with so much that you said. I sometimes like to compare it because when I teach writing, and I know writers have these goals to be published and to maybe be rich or to maybe be famous, and I wonder, like, am I selling them some false bags of goods when I know how unlikely this is? But then on the other hand, I coach swimming, and none of those kids are going to make the Olympics, most likely. And I don't feel bad about that at all. So I think in swimming, I think about all the joy it's bringing to their lives, all the other benefits that it brings to their lives. And so they're striving for this goal they'll never make. Who cares? That's life, right? But so I'm trying to bring that same mindset to writing. There's so much that it brings you,
But
whether or not you get to this hugely unrealistic goal or not.
I know, and I think that's what I really wanted to make clear, because I think somehow when it comes to other endeavors, we know that, like, whether it's athletic, like, you know, like I work out all the time. I'm really bad at it, and I don't think I'm ever going to be like a bodybuilder or like a fitness model, you know, and that's fine. Like during the pandemic, I took violin lessons. Like, did I record myself practicing and try to release it as an album? No, you know.
It just brought joy to your life and to try, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
but for
I,
some reason with writing, I think a lot of people feel like there's no point writing unless it's published, and that's just not the case. It's just not the case.
I think it's almost worse if you get a taste of it. Like people who've had that Canada Reads moment or that Giller Prize moment, it's like a taste of this dreamt of success, and then you just want
Yeah,
more of it. It's not like it satisfies any urge. It just makes you
yeah,
want more of it. That is more
yeah, and
unlikely
you're
to.
happy for like 10 minutes, and then you're back to, oh, no, I have to write another book. And this one might not be published.
And open
Yeah.
up for questions, but I want to share this story that I also think is public knowledge. I don't think I'm telling tales at a school, like you said, but I know a writer in Canada who was given $1 million advance on his book, and everybody talked about it all the time back then because it was the biggest advance anyone had ever gotten. And he was pretty young, and he felt it a ridiculous amount of pressure to go around and be dragged from place to place all over the country, or to sit in his radio
Yeah.
booth and give 12 different interviews across the country and have all this pressure that he's supposed to try to make back $1 million advance. So he never wrote again, or he did write again. He never let anyone see his books again. I'm like, well, does your girlfriend read your books? He's like, nobody. They're in my desk and nobody read. Write because I like to write, and I use that money to but he'd used it to open a theater and produce local plays because it's so hard to get a play produced. And he lives in a little apartment above it, like lives very frugally, and never published another word because he's so disliked that experience of trying to live back up to this ridiculous
Amazing.
advance. Yeah. So, anyways, anyone else have comments or questions? I'm sure Naomi and I could talk all day about about making the sausage and whether to make it anyways. So every day you have to ask yourself.
I'm
I'm
so
not sure what the
sorry about
best.
my voice being so crackly.
Your voice sounds
Hi,
good.
Alan here.
Go ahead,
Uh,
Alan.
so yes, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on Substack for new writers as a tool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great way to get your writing out there and to connect with readers. I mean, again, like you have to be doing it for the love of it. It's not, I don't think, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I haven't done it myself, and I know some people, you know, make a little bit of income doing it. If you're not already well known, like in that sense, it's probably not going to boost you to, it's not going to boost your income that much, or how well known you are. But I mean, I guess this is an area where I'm not very knowledgeable. I do think like it's great to engage with other people in that way and get your work out into the world. At the same time, I mean, I think it depends on the kind of writing you're doing. And I think that like on some level, it, especially when it comes to fiction, I mean, if it's a newsletter or something like that, then great. But like when it comes to fiction, I think what we actually don't really, we shouldn't want our work out in the world until it's ready. Like we all have this dream of, you know, being published as soon as possible. But in fact, what you really want is to be published when your work is as good as it can possibly get. So to have some patience, not to publish first drafts, not to publish, you know, even 10th drafts, not to be in a rush, not to put like not to record yourself, you know, practicing the violin and release it online, because like it's not ready for an audience. And also, you know, you might look back in 10 years when you've actually mastered the craft and realize like I wish that that wasn't out there, but now it is and I can't take it back. So I mean those are all things to consider. Oh, you're muted, Angie.
Yeah, I saw that. Any other questions? Sorry, any other questions? We have a few minutes left, so just jump in and ask, or else you can raise your hand if you want with the little hand raising thing. Sounds like everybody is good. I want to say the publisher or press that Naomi works for, Freehand Books, does my favorite books. I've never read a bad Freehand book. They're so good. And
I agree.
the covers are often designed by Natalie Olson, who's a brilliant cover designer too. So they're beautiful books, and um yeah, everything about them is great. So it's just sad that they don't get more readers, but like you say, you got to set different ideas of success and
Yeah,
realistic.
I mean,
I
I
don't know.
really think
Yeah.
that that's what it comes down to, is that we can set ourselves up, like we compare ourselves to this impossible vision, like maybe that comes from, you know, what a writer might have achieved 100 years ago or 50 years ago and been this big star, or what, you know, one or two or five people in the world have right now, and we're like, I'm going to be that. And then when we don't achieve that, it feels like failure. And I also, like, one thing I didn't have a chance to say that I really want to say about, you know, if you want to be a writer, you also need a way to make money. You need a job. And unless you have like someone else who's supporting you, which some people do, which is great, or you're, you know, an heir to a fortune or something like that. But like, if you need an income, it's not like, it needs to be at a job that you're committed to and that you like. It can't be like, oh, I'll just do this until my writing takes off and then I'll quit. Because like, almost for sure, you will never get to quit.
And if you try to write for that kind of success, like the big publishers and the money, it becomes a ridiculous game. Like I said to my agent, so I'm going to guess what you're going to guess. I'm going to guess what you think the editor at Penguin will think, that the marketing person will think,
Yes.
that the public wants to read in 2 years. Like,
Yeah.
what kind of guessing
Yeah.
game is that? So I just,
Yeah.
and I did the, I write because I love to write. I write because I can't help writing. And that shift, I think, makes a person's writing a lot more interesting too. Once you just start writing from your heart, or for those spiritual
Oh
reasons you're
yeah.
meant,
Yeah.
or because it's what you're meant to
Definitely.
do. Who reads it. Yeah. Thank you so much. This is, I see so many thank yous in the chat. So make sure you have a look and see all the thank yous to you. And
Oh
thanks
my
to
gosh,
everybody
I'm
for
so
coming.
sorry. Like, I misjudged how long it would take to say the enormous
Oh, no, it
number
was
of pages
great.
I wrote.
It was great. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for coming. And yeah, don't forget Naomi's here till the end of December. So drop her an email, or oh, someone's super inspired. Ashley. Thank you, Ashley. She said even in the face of the bleak publishing, it's inspiring. That's good. Thank you guys. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Naomi.